You're listening to the Forest School podcast with Lewis Ames and Gemma Southerden.
And a massive thanks to our current patrons, Simon Kenny, Joe H, Brona Steed, Jude Vincent and Chrissy McEvoy. Thank you so much, guys. It really does mean a lot. Oh, do you want to see how much progress I've made?
On what?
Since last week.
On what?
Oh, yeah.
That is much better.
Thanks.
I can't decipher what that would sound like in the real world, not through a computer. Because it sounds like you're also humming at the same time. Is that right?
Yeah, I am. You've got to try and do a weird hum in the back of your throat. I'm making slow progress.
Cool.
But yeah, we are talking today
To Alice Sheldon.
to Alice Sheldon about her book, Why Weren't We Taught This at School? Which is phenomenal. Please go and read it. It's not a heavy,
No, it's deep but not heavy.
It's
easy
very
to read but profound.
Whoa.
Sit on your
Yeah.
sofa, have a lovely time.
A very applicable, very like, I've read this and I want to go and do it straight away. I want to go and put this stuff into practice. So it was great talking to Alice, and we kind of talked about fingerprint needs to start off with, which was something that's, both of us found quite revolutionary. Then we talked about using that kind of needs approach for our own needs as we're practitioners. How do you balance your needs and the kids' needs? And we kind of finished it by talking about different scenarios where Alice's work has been used. So schools and workplaces and lots of different things. And that's roughly sort of 20 minutes on each topic as we go through.
Yeah. And listeners, the podcast ends with Lewis asking a great question, and then us running out of time for Alice to answer it. And it's like, it's
boom, 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 boom,
yeah,
boom, boom,
exactly.
boom.
And it's been niggling me so much that I reckon I'm going to ask her what the answer is to the question, and then maybe we'll try and put it in the next
episode. We'll try and put in either we'll read out an answer or see if we can get a voice note or something.
Yeah. So fear not. If you get there and you're like, but what is the answer, Alice? Help us, tell us. Hopefully she will by next time.
Fingers crossed. So yeah, enjoy. There we go. Right, good morning.
Good morning, Lewis. Hello.
How are you doing?
Well, I'm really delighted to be here. Thank you.
We're here with Alice this morning. We're both... Gemma, have you got Alice's book in front of you?
I haven't got it in front of me, no, but I have got it kind of near.
I, on the other hand,
You've got the book.
I've got it in front of me because I didn't have it in front of me, and I thought, I better have it in front of me. So I've just found a copy. So yes.
Amazing. So we're talking to you today about your new book, Why Weren't We Taught This at School? Which I devoured in about 3 hours and then passed it on to Gemma. How far are you through it, Gemma?
I am, 3/4 of the way through it. And basically Lewis handed it to me so sometimes when we do this and like one of us will buy the book and then pass it to the other with lots of post-it notes in particular places where it's like, this bit's really interesting. If you're going to focus on a bit, read this bit, maybe skip over this because it's not relevant or whatever. And Lewis passed it to me with just rainbow post-it notes basically on every page. I was like, okay, I'm reading the whole thing. That's fine. And similarly, just stayed up really late. I thought, I'll read a bit now. And then at midnight, I was just still like, this is great. So we've absolutely eaten it up. It's brilliant.
I'm so glad to hear that.
So how would you, I guess it's probably worth sort of summarizing it a bit for people who haven't come across it. How would you summarize what the book is about?
Do you know, I still, Lewis, struggle to do it in a sentence or two, but my best attempt is to say that it turns out that there's a way of understanding the world which is quite simple at one level and quite profound at another. And when we have a grasp of that, it can be really helpful for many people in terms of relationships with partners, with parents, with children, with colleagues, but also with how they show up in the world in terms of, activism or running their business or whatever it is. And just a sort of headline of what that way is about. And anybody who's come across, I know some in your community certainly have done nonviolent communication or MVC. There's that's my original training. And both of these sort of areas of work are around the idea of needs, and the needs that we need to thrive. So not just our physical needs, but things like belonging or creativity, or my favorite one, do I matter? Or so how did I do in a few sentences?
No, that's great. That is, I mean, if I was going to say that's amazing, then I went, oh no, she wrote it. She does know what she knows what it's on about.
You should do.
Yeah, it's written. No, that is a great summary, because I think it is one of those things where I think the start of the book for me, because it started talking about NVC, and I am only sort of 3 or 4 years into my journey with NVC. And when I read it, and then Gemma and I have done podcasts about it, and we use it quite a lot in our setting. And so when I was like, oh, it's NVC, oh, okay, it's like modern NVC. But then it's not. There's more. It's almost like taking it one step further and going, oh, okay, this is the basis of it. And then what happens if you sort of take that by the hand and walk a bit further with it? And actually, Gemma and I both reflected on one of the main things that we thought that NVC was, we didn't realize it was missing at the time, but having read Why Weren't We Taught This, that aspect of like self-care and like self-need doesn't necessarily, I don't think, appear in a strong way in a lot of the NVC stuff. Would you say that's, Gemma, kind of what we...
Yeah, I would say exactly that the Marshall Rosenberg stuff is about communicating your needs in a non-violent way, for sure. But there's in your book, Alice, there is that stuff about fingerprint needs, which for me was so light bulb moment. And it's about just, rather than kind of just being able to communicate your needs in the moment, it's about kind of taking an inward look and working out what are the fingerprint needs that are there for you kind of all the time, and therefore might explain some feelings and some behaviour. Do you want to summarize, Alice, what fingerprint needs are? Because I'm sure you'll do a much better job than me.
I'd love to. And just to say that we rather gracefully, I slipped out there for a moment or two. So if I repeat something you've said, then it's not that I was asleep. So yeah, for me, I mean, this was such a key thing for me, particularly in my case, it was when I had a young child, and I really wanted to do my parenting in a way that felt like it kept the kind of relationship that I wanted with her. And one of the things I found very difficult to understand was why I was experiencing at what were really pretty mundane moments in our life, absolute sort of extreme, what I would describe as murderous rage, or others might talk about red mist, or ridiculously strong. And most of us have a version of that, particularly with the people that we're closest to in our work or our home settings. Those sort of triggers, and so fingerprint needs was really my understanding of what lies behind that, and it fits with all of our modern neuroscience. And basically the idea is that when something affects us disproportionately in terms of how we feel, there's usually stuff from the past coming in. Obviously that's not a new idea, but it's a lovely way of framing it, that actually each of us has somewhere around 2 to 5 fingerprint needs. And in those moments, they are what get triggered. So in my case, I mentioned the needing to matter because it's a dear one to me, because the example I start with in the book, in fact, is trying to shoehorn my child out of the door when we've had a perfectly reasonable agreement that that's what's going to happen, and then she doesn't want to go. Also completely obviously reasonable, but I really do want to go, I'm desperate to go. And that reaction in me that's so powerful, one of my fingerprint needs is do I matter? And so in that situation, because a part of my brain is like, oh, I recognize the situation from when you were 5 or you were 7 or you were 9, and it's where I felt like I didn't matter in my family of origin, regardless of my parents' intention, in this same situation where I'm trying to get out of the door, and I feel like my poor 6-year-old isn't taking any notice of me. Of course she's not, she's 6. I want her to need to look after me, but I do, if I know that what is happening is she, I am interpreting it somewhere in my brain as I don't matter here, you get everything, I do everything, I'm a poor beleaguered, but whatever. And that allows me then to both get some space in the moment and be less likely to yell at her, but also to look at what might be going on behind and, over time, put different strategies in place. So that's one of mine. And I'm curious, because I know, Lewis, when you originally emailed me, that was one of the things you had particularly sort of flagged. And so I'm curious how both of you got on with that concept.
Oh, yeah. It's like really, I think I can't, what word I use, groundbreaking, revolutionary to me for sure. And as I've been kind of digesting the book, little kind of light bulb moments have been going off for me, absolutely, for sure. And that idea that you describe in the book about like once you've identified a fingerprint need, it allowing yourself for like self-empathy. So it's not an excuse for crazy behavior, but it's an explanation for it. And that idea about putting strategies in place. So I think I'm at the stage now where I'm kind of like identifying, and I've picked up on a couple for sure. And that and the way you describe in the book about and just now about those moments where you have reacted disproportionately, you've kind of done something and you've looked back on it and gone, whoa, what was I doing? Like I've completely lost control there. And it being just like somebody pushing that button for you. And then you notice a pattern in your behavior over the years, or in your career choices or your relationships and all those kind of things. So I think it's so useful to be able to identify those. And I think I've still got some work to do on that. And I really like the tone of the book, where it is very much talking about kind of, allowing yourself to have those feelings. There was a really lovely bit about feelings, in fact, which I took a photograph of the bit. I started to kind of write it out and I was like, no, this is too big. And it's this bit I've just loved. It was if we can start to understand ourselves and those around us, if we can start to understand that our feelings are valuable messengers about our needs, we can accept them, make sense of what they're telling us, and act on them with awareness. Rightly understood, our feelings are a resource rather than a distraction that gets in the way. They're an indicator of what's important to us in any given moment. That was like, wow, rather than going, I'm annoyed with myself for losing control or feeling angry or feeling upset and then just blaming and getting into that cycle going, oh, actually, those feelings are valid. So where are they coming from? Why are they there? And they're going to tell us something about ourselves. I thought was like, wow, completely that.
Yeah, I love that. And I love I do love that in this work, that balance between real self-understanding, self-empathy, and as you say, that not sort of then being an excuse to kind of get lost in that or to act in ways that are really unpleasant for other people. But it's a both and that's what I find so sort of invigorating about this way of looking at things, and so hopeful actually.
Yeah.
How about you, Lewis?
Find out about CPD courses at childrenoftheforest.com. Check out the podcast links for more details.
Yeah, I think I went on a bit of a journey with mine because I think I was trying to work out, that description you give of like, it's like when the red mist is down, or when you realize halfway through shouting that in the back of your head, you've got that monologue going, why have I ended up shouting? That's quite interesting. And I'm not a particularly shouty parent. I get frustrated and I'll, do whatever. But I realized I kind of went on a bit of a journey where I realized that a lot of mine was based around things, and particularly my children are 2 and 4, both very like destructive period of time. And I was going, oh, what? And then I was going, well, can I have a need that is the things? Because that's not my need. It's like, oh, that thing needs to get looked after, but that's not my need. And then it took me a while to work back to the point where I was going, oh, it's because that thing, whether it's an activity I've set up or a thing, a thing that it represents my time or it represents my effort. And so I realized that it was not being valued that I was seeing. So that made it then make more sense. And again, it's one of those things where, when you talk about children being dysregulated or learners being dysregulated, and actually once you get a name on it, it's a lot easier to understand, because it goes from this weird bodily sensation, particularly with young children. They might go, oh, it looks like you might be quite like angry or frustrated. And as soon as there's a word on it, they sort of go, yeah, I think that is it actually. And similarly for me, because you can then spot it more times, I think. And I go, oh, okay, this is what's going on. So either, like you say, you put stuff in place, or you're able to reframe, like, no, he's not kicking the table because the table cost me 80 hours at work. He's kicking the table because he's kicking the table. I've put everything else on top of that. But that then led me to kind of an interesting thought, where I was trying to think about this idea of like self-care and having our own needs. And so obviously Gemma and I, lots of people that listen to this podcast, we work in childcare settings where in some senses we're told to sort of completely shelve our own needs, you know, and particularly in like I know you're quite close with Lily, so like that play working background, that kind of thing, of like always going like, oh, if you're enjoying it a bit too much, then going like, this is you meeting your play needs, you need to step back a bit, or this is you getting something met. And so I just wondered if you'd had any thoughts or experiences around that idea of how can we be leaders and role models, and sort of on one hand model what we're doing and going, these are my needs, but on the other hand not letting that get in the way of like professional practice.
Yeah, I mean, what a great question. We could probably spend an hour on this alone, because I certainly don't have a sort of one-line answer, but let's just riff a little with the ideas. So a few kind of things that spring to mind, and you alluded to it, Lewis, when you spoke. I do think there is something really valuable about modelling to children that we have needs as adults, and that we are taking care of our needs, you know, in a way that attempts to take care of the whole. And I think there's something very, very beautiful actually about us, you know, enjoying. I mean, we wouldn't be doing the jobs we do, whatever they are, unless they were meeting our needs to a greater or lesser extent. Yeah. So I think the question around that, well, some of the issues might be around where, rather than holding, as adults, what I would love is that we are holding both our needs and those in our care with care. And we may choose, it might meet our needs as professionals, our needs in terms of what we're wanting to contribute, to prioritise those young people's needs a lot of the time. That meets our needs in a sense. Yeah. And there might be there might be times when we slip again into trying to meet our needs, what I'll label as inappropriately. In other words, we unconsciously are meeting our needs at the cost of, you know, of other people. That I think is, you know, that I think can be is where we want to try to reel ourselves in a bit. But also there's that important point around the difference between what I would call a kind of permissive being and a lovingly boundaried being as an adult when we're holding children. And essentially there are going to be times when, to care for the whole, including our own needs, we do need to put boundaries in, even though those aren't necessarily going to meet the instant needs of the child. But as an adult, you know, we do have that larger perspective that a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 10-year-old won't have actually. So yeah, that was my first attempt at a little ramble.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is one. It is. It's just it's a tricky balancing act, isn't it? And I think that's where a lot of our work involves sort of more reflection than other childcare professions might. And I think one of the things that sort of leads forest school practitioners to is a reflection on, like, in that experience, was that my needs? Where was the balance there? What was going on? That you might not get in other childcare settings if you're kind of going, oh, did I deliver the curriculum? Did I, was the tough tray organized? Those sort of things. They're not reflecting on that balance. And Gemma and I try and vocalize quite a lot, because I think there's also something to be said for modeling and sort of showing the the sort of altruistic thing of when a learner does help you meet a need of your own, that is a positive experience and a learning experience for them. Obviously, it's that balancing thing, but not sort of hiding that, being quite open and being like, oh, I feel a lot better now that that's in place, or I actually feel quite looked after now that my body is here. And Gemma, we work quite hard on sort of vocalizing that, even though it sounds a bit clunky sometimes, don't we?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Talking through what the interior world and making it more explicit for children so they can see those kind of processes that are happening inside and the kind of results of their actions, for example, when they've,
which is music to my ears, Gemma, because I don't know if you've yet got to the bit in the book about the difference between praise and reward as a sort of manipulative tool, which and manipulative is a strong word to use, because actually, as you say, Lewis, I think many people in the childcare profession, they aren't thinking in those terms, but just that systemically, if we are incentivizing children to behave in a particular way, there's a real risk that we aren't connecting them with what feels good to them. We're telling them what feels good to us, and that they need to do more of it to get more of the pats on the head or the gold stars or whatever it is. Whereas one of the alternatives is to give honest feedback, so that where we've enjoyed something, and how lovely is that as a child? My daughter loves nothing more than on the days where she isn't seized with 14-year-old angst and actually is energized to contribute in some way. And and I come in and I'm like, wow, the kitchen looks amazing. That's so lovely. Now I can sit down and really enjoy my evening with you, or whatever it is, and you can see that kind of like growing in her, that I think feels so different to a more of a sort of, if you clear up the kitchen 3 times this week, you'll get
you're preaching to the choir. I'm steps away from like an Alfie Kohn tattoo on my neck or something. Like, that's the level that I'm at. Maybe a big old portrait here. I think I've got a space.
You could go with your forehead, Lewis. Could
there
I
we
just
go.
say? I think that could be good too. Then it'd be really strong message.
Oh, it would save me a lot of time. Alice, I wanted to ask you about. So we talked about like fingerprint needs, and I wanted to ask you if there's any legs to the idea of a group or a community having like a shared fingerprint need that they only have when they're a group. So in my head, I was thinking about like a class or like a peer group, and whether they would still have that fingerprint need in another setting, or whether they would only have it as that group.
Love that question, Lewis. Tell me more. What is there an example that you're thinking of?
Well, I think from an education background, I was thinking about a class that might have had a particular incident of trauma or a particular like need not being met. You take a whole school year and whatever, something, it doesn't get met. Whether a child in that class, if it was, I don't know, and let's say a need to feel that they matter, whether that child could absolutely matter, and there's not a fingerprint need when they go to gymnastics club, but it is when they meet those peers again and they suddenly collect as a group. Or possibly, in a business setting, it might be one working group who goes, oh, we don't feel valued when we're in this space by the rest of the business. Individually, they know their work is valued in other areas. I don't know. It kind of...
I love it. And I haven't thought about it. And I really like it because it's making me think about some, I sometimes talk, and it's not really a needs understanding or an MVC concept, but think about the shadow in organizations. What's the stuff that we hide, that we don't deal with, and that can therefore get projected onto a difficult employee or a difficult child or a difficult member of staff or whatever it is. And I love this as a sort of way of thinking about of groups and how groups function. And it makes absolute sense to me that a group could have a particular unmet need because of their experience together as a group. And then I'm thinking about the interplay with, and for me, obviously the pandemic strikes up immediately. Like we've got, kids coming in from all sorts of places, but there are groups who suddenly experience some of the same stuff together. Yeah, I mean, and I wonder whether also it kind of, you talked about whether you could feel like exactly the need to matter in your group, but actually not experience that as a need when you're out of it. I wonder also whether there could be something about the group experiences which touch on a particular need for the group, and for some of the individuals within that group, that mirrors that like exacerbates, if you like, a fingerprint need that they already have. So if you've got 5 kids in that class, you've got a need to matter, and suddenly the whole group's experiencing that, whether those children are then one could say might be particularly affected. Maybe.
Yeah.
So, go on, Gemma.
Well, I was just thinking about sort of this leading on to, I had a sort of question about, you mentioned school in the title of the book. Do you have a kind of an idea, a dream about how this kind of approach could be embedded sort of throughout the education system? We're talking about classes and needs and things. In a kind of ideal dream world, how could you imagine this being completely interwoven through our education system?
Yeah, I mean, again, another day of conversation.
Yeah.
And so it is so, I mean, just to say up front that I've had some experiences in forest school settings as a parent, some as a kind of, as a volunteer or working with young people, and now just obliquely working with Lily. And let's go on to say something about Lily maybe in a moment, but now I've forgotten what the question was.
How could you imagine this being embedded?
Vision for education.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, in terms of systems change, what would that look like? What would it look like to have schools? So the elements for me would be a much, much higher proportion of adults to younger people, and not just adults who are of working age and who are but there'd be much more of a community, that there'd certainly be much more of a community kind of involvement. I would love to see choice as a real defining element, so that young people are much more equipped and able to, there are resources available for them to make more choices around what they are doing and what they are engaging in. And I think for me, so I've chosen to educate my daughter through the mainstream school system, and what's abundantly clear to me is the amount of care and love and professionalism throughout the teaching and support staff professions. So what for me is problematic is the hierarchical system that we have, and the exam system that we have. So much, there are kind of, I suppose I couldn't say to you, I imagine that all schools would look like this, that, or the other, but I could tell you that the needs that I see not being met time and again of children, and that's why I say more adults, children really being seen and mirrored and held, and for it to be okay. I remember my daughter at sports day, I watched her as she went first in the sack race that she'd been totally looking forward to, and then fell over and came last, and I could see her, she was 7, and I could see her holding it all, just because there was no place she could say that, and she was just that little bit too old to dissolve into and that, I mean, children have that experience day in, day out, because there isn't the capacity to respond. And I imagine, and from what I've seen in the setting that you're working in, there is some real difference in that possibility of just allowing allowing kids to be held in a different way.
Gemma has an absolute meltdown when she doesn't win a game. No, I'm joking.
That's really interesting as as an approach in terms that you see that as one of the most important things, and extra adults. And I guess in an ideal world, adults who have had this kind of background, or these, reading about nonviolent communication and understanding needs. That'd be great, wouldn't it? Yeah. And as you say, there are already so many people working, giving everything to the children that are in their care, in their classroom, and sort of working so hard in such a difficult environment, with the pressures put on them and their needs not being met, because of the stressful times, especially in the pandemic. That's really interesting. And I'm sure that people still working in education would also have their needs met far more if they were able to share those roles and responsibilities with twice as many, 3 times as many adults working alongside them.
Absolutely, Gemma. And this is the second time this thought has come in this these moments, so I'll share it. That it's noticeable when I go into work in schools and I ask teachers to think about. I give an example of a parent and a child, and I ask them to think about the needs for each of them, and almost always the list of needs for the children is it's massively long, and then we get to the needs of the parent, and they're kind of they're sort of like, it takes real time, and often they will say after sessions, I, as a teacher, I never think about my needs. I didn't even know I was allowed to have any, or what to do with them. And that just feels really, that feels sad to me, that again, the system is just so kind of run out with lack of that kind of empathic resource. So yeah.
That's great that you're working with schools. So is that something you do often with kind of staff bodies, and go in and talk about this?
Yeah, absolutely. It tends to be, staff rather than children. Although I do have a teaching qualification from way back, so it is something that I love working with young people, and sometimes I go and play, if you like. So there'll be something where a teacher friend will say, come and team teach something or whatever, and that's really fun. But working with teachers is an absolute privilege, and just cover. What we normally look at is just some of the starter pieces, those pieces we've been mentioning today about what empathy looks like, what self-empathy looks like, how that can affect you if you're in the classroom, what it looks like when you're in the corridor, all the whole I love that.
Oh, great. God, I wish I would have had training like that when I was teaching. It would have been amazing.
I didn't know you taught, Gemma.
Yes, yeah. 9 years.
Okay.
Yeah, in secondary.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, not a lot of time for those kind of discussions, sadly.
Support the podcast today by becoming a Patreon member at childrenoftheforest.com. Check out the podcast links for more details.
That's kind of just what I was wondering as I was listening. So I was kind of imagining this sort of work going into a school, and in my head it immediately went into early years, and that's just because, and through the work that we've done, things like this are quite I don't want to say easy, but because early years is more flexible, because it's more, early years is still, touch wood, a bit more holistic, and there's room to look at emotional growth as well. Have you found any barriers as it sort of moves up? Because obviously if you can keep this sort of work going through primary school, you're going to get someone with, I don't want to say less fingerprint needs, maybe different fingerprint needs when they meet secondary school and above. But lots of, like you say, that ringing out of the school system is kind of like, okay, now we're into key stage 1, key stage 2, we're focusing on other stuff. So have there been any barriers, and are there any kind of solutions for getting it higher up in education?
I don't think so. There are barriers in terms of what we talked about earlier, that the system is the system. So at the moment, the the fact is that a secondary school is looking more or less at league tables, and that's because parents are looking more or less at so it's there is a conflict between the systemic overlay and whatever might be going on within a school, because ultimately we have an exam system, but really it's only limited by that, and below that then it's a case of what usually makes things fly in a school is the higher up the staffing ladder someone gets it and goes, okay, this could really be of help. I can really see this. It's a partnership thing, Lewis. So without that kind of without that, and this is true in any setting that I work in, I always see it very much as something where I'm not just going in and sort of delivering a training top down or whatever. It's more, okay, what are the needs here? How can we do something that will really serve you and that you can then carry forward with or without my help? But it is all to do with individual people getting it, which is why which is why I wrote the book, really, was just so that the work is out there and people can go, okay, yeah, this fits for me. No, this doesn't fit for me. Yes, Alice, can you do this? No, whatever. But it's just like my best friend said to me, she was like, okay, now you've done the book, you can comfortably go under a bus. It's fine. Your job is done. I'm like, okay, thanks, best friend.
Oh, amazing.
Can we say something about Lily? Lewis, John, would that be just in terms of, because obviously I am sitting here with this book and none of the listeners will be able to see it, but throughout it there are these absolutely delightful illustrations that have been done by Lily, who stepped in without an illustration background or training or anything, but just a passion for drawing. And actually someone had seen her sitting, someone I taught ages ago, seen her sitting in an NBC workshop drawing these little characters. And when I put up online, this is the sort of thing I'm looking for, I can tell you my attempts at showing what I was looking for considerably appalling compared with what we've ended up with from Lily. But I just think they add a huge amount to the book, and again are a kind of real sense of the sort of teamwork that's gone through the book. And it's because of Lily indeed that really I'm here with you guys this morning. So I'm what a lovely thing to meet you both through that.
Yeah, her drawings are special, aren't they? They're so simple, but really convey so much. And I know that the whole Forest School community have found a lot of her illustrations so useful in lots of things. From, she's done an illustrated Beaufort scale for, wind stuff. Every time someone goes, oh, what's the safe wind speed for running a session, whatever, and the way that she's taken that information and illustrated it. And yeah, lots of other occasions that are similar. So yeah, big up, Lily. Thanks.
Well, they are need meeting, aren't they? Because, and Gemma and I have talked about this sort of on and off for a long time, but like Forest School attracts wonky people. Like we're a wonky community, and quite often that wonky community comes with people that we're not all like bookworms or people that can process stuff in the same way. And so we need wonky explanations to get through. And that's what things like doodles and things like examples can do. Is like communicate in different ways, meeting needs.
I love that. Yeah. Wonky. Am I allowed to join the wonky community? I really like that.
It's difficult because you can't put it on an application form. Are you wonky?
And if not, do you deal well with other wonks? I mean, you can go anywhere.
Yeah. What's your experience of wonkiness? Please, can you describe an experience of wonkiness and how you adapted?
What are the needs underlying your particular version of wonky?
Yeah. Alice, just before we go, I wanted to ask, so obviously a lot of the work that we're doing is very long term. For some of us, for some of the children that come to us, learners that come to us, they've been with us 4 years plus. So what a lot of your book is looking at is kind of like that fingerprint need, that kind of stuff, have gone like, oh, this has happened and this is how we meet it. I wondered if you had any thoughts or stuff about, so some of our listeners will be in a situation where they can see like needs developing. So you might have a learner who 2 years ago did not have this need, but through a series of circumstances, you can see something growing. Whether that's an experience you've come across, whether there's something we can, whether there's a process for identifying that and like over meeting it so it doesn't, I guess the question is, can you stop something becoming a fingerprint need if you see it early?
Yeah, that's lovely.
Might be no.
It's an interesting question. So I would say that definitely we can mitigate it. Often things within families, or whatever the family setup, the care setup is that the child is held within. So whoever the primary caregivers are, whether those are parents or foster parents or care homes, whatever it is, that they are the places where that repeated interaction, there's just more time spent within those. So actually that's, if there is a dynamic within the family where something is happening, then it's the most effective thing is where the family system starts to change. But that said, yes, I've definitely seen needs developing, particularly over the primary years, with time. And indeed, I think that's just normal child development to some extent. We have different needs at different ages. Some of them, and they're all there all the time anyway, but the focus is on different ones. They are met more or less effectively within our immediate family setting. So then as practitioners coming in, I think there is something about, and I don't want to use the term needs audit because it starts to sound so unlike anything that I kind of do or believe
Love
in.
a tick box.
Yeah, absolutely, exactly.
Can it be a spreadsheet?
With 95, I have any needs there are on it. I don't actually know how many needs there are on the needs list. But I think there is something about having a framework which says, okay, actually let's have a discussion once a year about this particular young person, which can include the young person, actually how, if we were going to look through the lens of needs, what might we say? I always want to say, and I think you'll both pick this up from the book, I'm so wanting this to be non-prescriptive and just to be invitational, as if this framework is helpful, use it. If it's not, ditch it. But I think looking from time to time at, okay, let's think about those needs. And in terms of meeting it, Lewis, what do you then do about it? Let's imagine you identify, okay, Alice, age 6, clearly demonstrating sort of need to matter. Then you meet it as best you can by, inappropriately within the setting of the children, how can we help, Alice to have that experience that she really matters? So she may not be feeling she matters at home, but maybe, she can feel she matters here, and that could be a supportive thing, I guess.
Yeah, I love that. I love that in a way, as almost, as you say, not as an audit and a tick box thing, as Lewis said, but Forest School, as Lewis said, is so reflective, but it's often helpful, especially when you're starting out, perhaps, to have a almost like a frame to hang your reflections upon, and to go, right, if we're just going to reflect on that session, what are the needs that we saw then? And you're always guessing, aren't you? You can't know what's, in the interior world of everybody. It's really, but I guess if you're taking this needs-based approach, you're probably not going to do any damage, are you? If you misread somebody's need as, a need to be creative, and actually it wasn't that, it was a need to be something else. And, you try and prep and plan opportunities to meet those needs in the next session, you're not going to do any harm and lasting damage if you kind of, inaccurately describe that need. But I really like that as an idea of kind of doing a summary of the session and of the groups and the behavior that you noticed and what was behind that. And we do that all the time, but we might not necessarily use that needs language. And it could be so useful, I think.
I feel like I can see concentric circles, like needs of the individual, needs of the like group, needs of the whole school. Like I can see the...
Yeah, I love that. And what was coming to me, Lewis, you will have reached it, Gemma probably not yet, but that the way that I, 90% of the time find it most helpful to work when I'm working through situations or reviewing a session or whatever, is to use that framework where we look first at our needs and then at anybody else's needs who are involved. So actually we start with what are my needs as the practitioner, what was going on for me. It's that self-empathy piece first, and just naming and making conscious what was there. Oh, yeah, of course that behavior triggered me particularly because this, and it gives a really safe way of naming it. Then let's move over, and once you're kind of free of that, or you've put that on a shelf, let's move over and look at what's going on over here. And then you step to the end and do, and look at, okay, holding all of that with care. What does the next session look like? It's the planning step. So it's the kind of, it's kind of how do you actually, in practical terms, go down to the needs and then come out to the practical.
And I really like what you said about, sorry, Liz, about as a practitioner, one of your needs might be meeting other people's needs. I definitely think that is a thing to acknowledge and go, yeah. And therefore, if you felt like you weren't doing that session, that's really going to have an impact on you. That's interesting.
Absolutely. And in fact, I mean, for most people who are in any kind of caring, contributing role, that's going to be a massive driver that, we long to contribute to other people.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of time, Alice. I think I'm going to pose a question, not expecting a particular answer before we go. So there's a thought that I want to pose, and maybe this is something that we can discuss with like the people listening, is like, is there a place for discussing? So obviously Gemma and I are a team and work together, but we might have conversations around, oh, that person's got that need, or I think that person's displaying a need for X, Y, or Z. It's been going around my head recently of trying to work out how to communicate that to, obviously not like 4-year-olds, but to at a certain level of understanding, whether you can explain to a peer, like, well, they threw that at you because they've got this need going on, or like, well, actually, you didn't do anything necessarily wrong, but they're really upset, or they're feeling really good because, whether there's some language there of explain, it's like third party and not wanting to talk about someone else while they're not there, but also trying to communicate what's happened when potentially everybody involved, of everybody involved, you, the observer, might be the only one that's got a handle on what needs were being met, not being met. But I think, like you said, we could go off on that one for quite a long time. So what I will say is there anything that we should have asked you about the book? And where can people find you more about you and your work and everything else? Thanks, Lewis. And I'm restraining myself answering your question with some difficulty. So I have a website which we could maybe put in the notes, but I'll just say it's needs-understanding.com. And my request is, so I had a moral battle about whether to sell the book on Amazon or not, but because I really wanted to be a mainstream book, I have decided to do that. So my request would be, wherever you buy the book from, if you are going to buy it and read it, if you have an Amazon account and would be willing to leave me a review, I'm trying to get to 100 reviews by the end of the year, by the 31st of December. So that would be really supportive for me, because I have a small publisher and I just really love to get the word out about the book. And secondly, if you have any ideas about how I could do that, if you like the sound of it and think it could be supportive, it's very much about wanting to make an impact in the world. So any leads on that would be so very welcome. Amazing. Great. That's great. Well, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Alice.
It's been lovely.
so much for having me. That's a real pleasure.
If you like this podcast and want to support more episodes, you can donate through Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Children of the Forest to show your support for the Forest School podcast.